Well, good afternoon, everybody. I think I'll make that 2 o'clock. I can just see a few more people logging in, but I think we'll get started for those of you that have turned up on time today. So welcome to the latest webinar from Marketing Sciences Unlimited. My name is Ian Ralph. I am the Digital Director here at Marketing Sciences, and I'm going to talk to you today, as I'm sure you're all very much aware, about measuring the digital life of today's consumers. What do people do, where are they going, and how are they doing things on their various devices online. That's quite a big topic to cover. Today's focus is very much going to be around how we can use passive metering to help answer that question. I think it's very important as we go through, and hopefully I'll touch upon this, that passive metering is a very useful tool to understanding the digital life of today's consumers. But to fully understand this question, we obviously have to use that in conjunction with many other methods and tools that we as researchers have at our disposal. I'm hoping to talk for about 20 minutes of our allotted half an hour today. If you have any questions, please do post them on the questions tool in the toolbar that you should see as part of the webinar. Of course, you can always send them to me via email or tweet them to me. My details are there on the screen at the moment, and I'll be happy to answer them and get back to you directly after the webinar. Okay. So the first question we have to ask ourselves is, why would we passively measure? Why would we use tools to measure what people are actually doing on the digital devices rather than just purely asking them? And I think it comes down to 5 points, really. Don't get me wrong, surveys and qualitative methods have their place. It's very important to understand what people believe they're doing or perceive they're doing. But if we want to measure accurate behavior, there are 5 areas in which claimed methods fall down. Firstly is historical inaccuracy. People might be able to recall what they're doing today, but they will probably struggle to tell you what they did on their phones, tablets, computers yesterday, certainly last week, and there's absolutely no chance people are going to remember accurately what they did last month or last year. So if we want to collect this information on an ongoing basis, we need to measure it rather than ask it. The second is poor recall. Even if we are asking people about what they did today or yesterday, people misreport. They might misreport what they did, or exactly when they did it, or how often they did it, or how long they spent on a particular website or app. Not on purpose, just misrecall and inaccuracy. The third point on here is what I call subconscious behavior. Lots of the things that we do on our devices, which we carry with us everywhere, that we use all the time, are starting to come subconscious in the way that we interact with them, particularly when we think about things like social media. Those furtive little glances on the phone, the alerts that come up from our social media apps, sometimes we're not even aware we're doing this as we're walking down the street. Fourth is potentially a lack of understanding. When we're looking to measure behavior against the general population, we have to remember that not everybody has the same level of awareness or comprehension in terms of their digital lives. Some people might not be able to differentiate between a website or an app. They might not know whether their device is on iOS or Android. They might not even be sure whether what they're using we would define as a smartphone or a tablet. They might not know whether they're on a cellular connection or Wi-Fi. These things can be important, and getting accurate information requires passive metering. And last but not least, some digital behavior is sensitive, and people may be able to recall accurately what they did as a conscious activity, and they understand it fully, but they just plain might not want to tell us. If somebody is researching a medical issue, they may not want to divulge that in a survey. If we're talking to younger people about using dating sites and apps, there may be some social stigma towards admitting what they're using or how often they're using it. So all of these things put together tell us that passive metering is perhaps required and a very useful tool to map the digital lives of consumers. I've just put a few example charts in here to bring that to life for you. This slide shows data from both a survey, so our claimed data here is telling us the percentage of people in our survey that told us they were using a particular social media app. The actual figures are from our passive metering data, which tells us how many of these people were really using it. What you can see on the apps above the line, so we have Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, WhatsApp, and Facebook. People are pretty good on the whole at telling us what they're using. There are some exceptions. The three that you'll see below the line there, Skype, Instant Messenger is one that's quite often underclaimed because there is some confusion amongst many about whether they're actually using Instant Messenger or Facebook itself, Facebook Messenger and Facebook, sorry. And YouTube is almost always underclaimed because it's never clear, it's not always clear that we're actually using YouTube. We might be going through Google, we might be going through a video embedded on another site. So we might actually be using a service that we're not actually consciously aware that we are. Okay, on the next slide. So while people might be able to recall what they're doing in surveys, what we have found is that they're less accurate at telling us how often they use something. You can see here, when asked in a survey, people told us they were using WhatsApp on average. WhatsApp users that are using WhatsApp on average 8 times a day. The reality on passive metering we see is 14 times a day. So this just illustrates the point I made earlier that people are less accurate at recalling how often they use a social media app, even if they know they're using it in general. And the same can be said when we ask people how long they spend. In our survey, people said on average, amongst Facebook users, they spent 17.5 minutes per session on Facebook. The reality is actually less than 3 minutes. So this goes to my point about these short, furtive, perhaps even subconscious glances at social media because alerts are coming up, because we're checking comments and likes on a post. We may not recall. When we ask people to think about in a survey, they tend to rely on those more significant, longer sessions. So if we take it then that passive metering is important, let's take a moment to think about what exactly passive metering is. In essence, passive metering is asking respondents, consumers, to download an app onto their various devices. This app sits in the background and it collects information about online behavior and device usage, collects it silently in the background, and then sends that back via a VPN connection to our central servers. That information is collected every 30 minutes and sent up to every 30 minutes if a connection via cellular or Wi-Fi has been made. Those apps can be placed on multiple devices for any one individual, so we can look at what they're doing across their phone, their tablet, their laptop, their PC. We can do this across Android and iOS, so iPhones and Android phones. We can do it across Windows and Mac. Once we have that app on people's devices, what we collect is rather vast. I would say it's almost everything to do with digital behavior. There are some limitations, but essentially we can record every website, every URL that somebody goes to via a browser. So we know every web page they have been to, we know what day and what time they were there, how long they spent on that page, and how frequently they revisited it. We also know search. So any search term that is put in things like Google and Yahoo and Bing to find a particular website, we can collect that. So we know what they're searching for, and we know where that then leads them to in terms of the web impressions. We can also collect app information. That's apps installed on devices, but also importantly, what apps are being used. We know that quite a low proportion of the apps actually installed on devices are used, or at least used regularly. We also collect device behavior. So particularly for smartphones, but also tablets, we know how that device is connected to the internet, whether that's on cellular or Wi-Fi, or a fixed connection via a PC or laptop. We can tell things like battery strength, signal strength. If GPS is activated, we can determine the location. So we also know where people are when they're doing all these things on their devices. We can also collect communication information. Now, that may sound scary. We know if and when people are making or receiving calls, emails, and text messages. However, we do not, you'll be glad to know, collect information about the actual calls being made and the texts and the emails themselves. We can also, given that we collect all the web traffic and web behavior, we can also collect two further things. One is ad exposure. So we are collecting information via the URLs of ads that people are exposed to on these websites, and working with brands, media agencies, we can map these tags and identify whether people have been exposed to and then click through on a given online advert. We can also track via an algorithm online purchases. So if somebody has bought a particular product from a particular retailer, because there is a known and given set of URLs that would be hit to achieve that, we can set an algorithm to identify whether a purchase has been made. I said there are some limitations. Obviously, we don't collect the information within voice calls, texts and emails. We also don't collect banking information and passwords. But it's also worth noting that in terms of apps, while we know what apps are installed and what apps are being used, the information about what's being done within that app, particularly if it's not going over the internet, that also is limited. Okay, so if we take it then the passive metering is important, we know that we can do it and what information we collect. How do we get consumers to allow us to track them? Because without consumers putting these apps on the devices, we wouldn't have any data. Well, there's essentially we would recruit people much as we would for other pieces of research. That could be panel-based, that could be bespoke sample, that could be recruiting people from client-given sample. Essentially, we would send an email invitation to that person, invite them to participate in the study. We would obviously have to give detailed information about what we're asking them to do, what information we're collecting, what information we're not collecting, and the various privacy and data protection entitlements within that. But then in terms of their behavior, it's quite simply click on a link to download the application onto their device. And once that application is activated, that will then sit in the background and they can use their device as normal, and we will then collect that data without them actually having to do anything. Now, as with most research, we obviously incentivize our consumers to allow us to do this with a financial incentive on an ongoing basis. But there are some fears to overcome. The obvious one from a consumer point of view is privacy. And we have to recognize that there is probably a self-selection bias to a very small extent, where there are some people who won't want us to track their behavior. However, in the way that we position the research and we engage with the respondents on an ongoing basis, there's lots that we can do to mitigate these fears. The app itself has very little impact on things like battery life and device performance and data usage. However, we do see that there is a perception amongst consumers that if their phone or tablet or laptop is having issues in any of these areas and they see performance drop, then the passive metering app can be perceived to be the problem behind that. However, tests that we and others have done would show that in fact the reality is quite slight, but we know that as researchers, perception is reality, and this is something that we need to address both in the recruitment and the ongoing panel engagement process. So bringing this all together then, you'll probably have noticed in the bottom right hand of my slides the Reflected Life logo. Reflected Life is the name of the marketing sciences approach to passive metering. It is both a technological approach in itself, but it is also a panel. We have a NatRep panel of the online UK population of almost 2,000 people who we're collecting data on an ongoing basis. There's on average of almost 2 devices per person on that panel. And we are collecting information across the various devices. It's not just mobile, it's not just PC, it is both. And because we're collecting everything, as I described earlier, it means for our clients, we not only track information for their brands, but for complementary brands, for competitor brands, for every website they might want to look at. So it certainly goes further than things like Google Analytics, where you get information for your own site only. Also, because it is a consumer-centric approach, unlike things like click aggregators, we don't just know how many people are doing what, when and where. We know who they are. Whether people are part of a panel or we have recruited them for a bespoke study, we will know the things like gender, age, social grade, where somebody lives, what their occupation is, through our standard profiler. but we also do regular surveys to understand attitudes, behaviours, and offline purchase behaviours for various categories and sectors of interest. So we can overlay this information with the passive metering information to really bring to life these digital behaviours for particular groups and target profiles. And of course, as a research solution, if there's something we don't know, we can just go and ask it. I mentioned at the beginning that passive metering needs to be used in conjunction with other tools. So yes, we can do surveys, we can do regular surveys, we can do topical surveys, you can even do event-driven surveys. If you want to talk to a particular audience after they have conducted a particular activity or been to a particular site or app, we can identify that and send them a survey, usually with a slight delay, rather than the moment they actually land on the website or just left it. But also qualitative techniques, depth interviews, bulletin boards and diaries can really add the meat to the bones to understand the why and how people feel around these certain behaviours. Okay, so the next thing to consider then is, as a brand, as a client that might be using passive metering, what does this insight do for me? What does this provide over and above what I might get from other means? Well, that's a very big question, and there's lots of good reasons behind it, but I thought I'd touch on four of the key areas certainly we've worked with our clients on. The first one here is about following and understanding and building pictures of online purchase journeys. Because this is an always-on data capture, we can understand everything through from the research phase, researching a purchase or a brand choice, professional advice from online opinion leaders or opinion formers, product and price comparisons, peer reviews, all the way through to ultimately a purchase. So we can recruit or identify people who are about to go on a journey and paint and follow this entire online journey, or we could even identify people on our panel who have engaged with the brand, seen an advert or made a purchase, and then look back in the historical data to understand the key milestones and key triggers that may have led them to that decision. We can identify emerging digital trends, look at what's key in a particular specific target or audience, or perhaps look at maybe what's not big now, but what is a small trend in terms of websites being looked at or apps being used, but that is growing fast. For example, there's a lot of talk in the new year. Everyone's trying to identify the next big thing in social media, and a lot of people are writing things about Peach, which is a new social media app currently only on the iPhone. A lot of people are talking about it, but are people actually downloading this app? Are people actually using it? Passive metering can tell us that. Optimization of discovery and search. Brands spend a lot of money with Google, with digital media companies, with online advertising to drive people towards their site and to purchase our products. By using passive metering tools, we can understand the journey from exposure or key search terms either immediately or over a prolonged period to find out whether that really is driving traffic and ultimately purchase. And the last one there, rationalization of web and app portfolio. We've worked with some clients who've got a number of websites for brands, a number of applications, and we can find out exactly who's using these, how they're using them, whether they're complementary, where's the overlap, where's the gap, so that going forward, digital strategies and digital spend can be optimized. I think I've touched on the sample issue. I said we have a panel. There are other suppliers out there that have panels that we can tap into for passive metering. We can also recruit bespoke samples. We can take client-given samples and put the passive metering tool on those groups. The data that we collect, I've touched on that, but it's not always just a case of collecting this passive metering data. It's then looking at how we can align that or overlay that with existing information, whether it's other digital trend sources, whether it's client databases, whether it's behavioral databases, to build up a holistic picture of the online journey.
Muted. Unmuted.
Sorry, lost sound there again. Hopefully I'm back. And finally, outputs. You can probably appreciate that a tool like this, which collects almost every digital behavior from our panel's case in point, 2,000 people on an ongoing basis collects a huge amount of data. That means there's a vast amount of analysis and data processing required on our part, but it also generates huge amounts of insight. Dashboards have their place, and when you want to look at key metrics for some key digital properties, dashboards can be very, very useful to track data on a trending basis. But actually, a lot of the insights come from, as any other research solution, telling stories and providing actionable recommendations on what brands can do with the data. So, I thought I would try and do just that for you and bring it to life for you with a case study. This is a study that we did for one of our clients at Tesco Bank, who wanted to understand the online journey for consumers taking out a personal bank loan. Now, we took a three-stage approach here. We started off by actually doing in-home depth interviews with a number of consumers who are about to take out a new bank loan to understand the context of the loan they were taking out, the expectations for that journey, and the history and experience in taking out loans. Was this their first loan? Have they taken out several loans before? We then used passive metering to track the real digital journey up until the point they took out the bank loan. And then we did a telephone depth interview to talk to the consumers about what they did on that journey, to get them to reflect on it, and to also understand the offline element. What that enabled us to do was to come up ultimately with a typical journey map, which you can a very simplified version you can see here on this slide. There are a number of journey types beneath this, but you can see that on the whole, we saw that people would go to Google and use a search term such as personal loan. They generally then went to Martin Lewis's Money Saving Expert website. If they were in need of a loan quickly and were quite experienced, they might go directly to the loan calculator of a bank. Otherwise, they would go to a comparison site and then ultimately to the loan calculator of a shortlisted number of brands. Depending on the answer they got, they could then enter this sort of vicious circle of comparing comparison sites. What this enabled the client to do was to really understand what is their position as an online bank in that process. How should they interact with their relationships with Google, with Martin Lewis, with comparison sites, and what exactly was it that people wanted from their website. So understanding their position in that journey, in that process, allowed them to optimize their development and their investment going forward onto not just key elements of the site itself, but how people could and should discover it. So that's looking at the data at a very top-line holistic point of view. I just wanted to illustrate with this slide that beneath that, we can go to a very granular level with passive metering data. You can see in this example, somebody was looking to buy a new TV on Black Friday, and we can see every step they take on that journey. So every web page they go to, we can see that it started on Friday the 27th at 5:49, where they go to Google and they put the phrase Black Friday into search. They then go to an independent expert to see what they thought about the offers available. They then took their advice on a particular product. They checked out that product on the brand's website. They then go back to Google because they want to search for the best price. They look at that product on 2 retailers before they ultimately make the purchase. And even more than that, on this last example, you can see by collecting all the information on each of a web page, in this case, somebody looking to buy a new family car, we can not only see that in this example, they went to 4 different sites to get information on the same car, but we can see that they're exposed to 10 different adverts from, I think, 8 different brands. That's interesting itself in terms of exposure to advertising. We could then look at the click-through to those adverts, but we could even track that user over time, given that the purchase of a car is quite an involved and prolonged experience. The exposure to those adverts on this instance, what might that correlate in terms of the research and the purchase process of considering other brands and other vehicles going forward? Passive metering in solutions such as Reflected Life can help us answer those questions. And there you are. I think I've slightly overrun my 20 minutes. I apologize for that, but certainly within the half an hour. If anybody has any questions that they would like to ask, I'd be happy to answer them. I'm just going to expand the question bar now and see what we've got. Oh, I can see somebody said they couldn't hear me. Hopefully that got resolved. I apologise for the sound issues we had there. We've got one question from Charlie asking about the impact of reflected life on battery life. I did touch on that within the presentation. As I said, hopefully you got that when we got to that slide. It is very minimal in terms of battery life. It doesn't take up much processing power, it doesn't take up much battery, it doesn't take up much data. I think the issue here is perception rather than reality. We got a question from Wendy saying this is great for online usage, but in retail, linking in-store behavior would make it even more powerful. Any plans to develop by adding in-store behavior? Really, really good question. You're absolutely right, and I did say something at the beginning about this. This tells part of the journey. This tells us exactly what's happening online, but we don't live exclusively in online worlds, at least not yet. There's a number of ways that we can do this. In my Tesco Bank example, I obviously talked about how we can use other research methods to fill in the offline element of that journey. What we can also do is by using the GPS data. Now this works better for large out-of-town stores, but we can track people's location and understand whether a given behaviour is being done. Is it in the home? Is it at work? Is it when they're out and about? Is it on the high street? Is it in a shopping mall? It's not just, the technology is not quite there yet, but I think in time, given technology that is going into a lot of retail stores in terms of understanding people's movement within, say, a supermarket or a department store by using sort of nanocells to understand specific locations on an aisle or within an aisle, then there would be a possibility to understand, by using the same passive metering technology, how somebody moves about within a given retail environment and understanding how that overlays with the digital behavior. So things like showrooming and price comparisons. Okay, I think that's all the questions that we had there. If anybody has any other questions for me, as I said at the beginning, please do send them to me by Twitter or email, and I'd be happy to answer them for you. And if anybody obviously wants any more information about passive metering and how we use it at Marketing Sciences, again, please get in touch with myself, and I'll be only too happy to talk to you. Otherwise, I wish you all a great afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Bye.